Hey everybody, this is Perch. Let's reach into the proverbial digital mail bag. It sounds so lame. Let's read them. Let's read some mail. Uh, hey, dear Perch, you've talked in the past about the Comics Code Authority. I seem to remember somebody asking you if bringing back the Comics Code Authority would be a good idea. Back when the Comics Code Authority was in place, was also an era where many of the comics were of higher quality. Perhaps in sorry, per, in your opinion, perhaps that was just correlation and not accurate. I don't remember that video. It was a long time ago. I think I said that I didn't believe the Comics Code Authority was the culprit behind comics being better, but the bigger culprit was the fact that you had the newsstand and comic books were selling hundreds of thousands of copies, and so there's just more at stake, and so that and you weren't competing against mobile phones and games and a lot of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of elements there that help to increase the quality um, of the content. Whenever I say these things, by the way, there's always somebody like, I don't know what you're talking about. Comics are great. I like these three comics. They're amazing. And it's like, there are good comics out there. I agree. I would say per capita, the majority of comics were better. But in fairness, I was also younger, so maybe stupid, but I do think, you go back and read those back issues. You just had a higher percentage of comics that are coming in at a higher percentage of quality. But I don't think it's because of, who's president or the politics that's the case. I think it's a lot more reasons than that. In fact, I think that's a much lesser reason. But anyway, back to the now. Perhaps bringing back the perhaps bringing back the Comic Code Authority is not a good idea, but I'm curious what you think of my idea. My idea would be a central body. Nice. Sorry. A central body that would basically govern the political ideologies of the comics that are made. You could have X percentage of left-leaning comics, X percentage of right-leaning comics, and this new agency would ensure that there was fairness in comics across the board. If you had a very liberal idea being presented in a comic, you had to present equal time for a conservative idea. That way, everybody would have something that they wanted. I've heard a couple other YouTubers talk about this with some enthusiasm. I'm curious what you think. P.S. I don't know which. Okay, I don't want to get into that part. All right. No, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't. And no offense. I mean, this idea has been discussed before. For some reason, I don't know if comics YouTube people seem enamored with this concept of what if we just had equal numbers of comics. I would like you to. I mean, think through the practicality of that. So one of the problems with comics, well, actually, before I get there, the biggest way to kind of filter and steer this, these companies that are producing these books in a capitalist company is don't buy them. If they're offensive to you and you don't like them, don't buy them. If you happen to be the majority opinion, sales are going to drop to the point that the comic will be canceled and, maybe the comic company will learn its lesson, maybe it won't, but either way, you're not spending money on things you don't like. That is the answer in all forms. But one of the big pushbacks I get when I say things like that is like, yeah, but Perch, I love Spider-Man and they're ruining Spider-Man. I should be allowed to get a comic book that has Spider-Man in it and not be subjected to, left-leaning ideals. I broaden that, by the way. I mean, to me, and I guarantee you, very few of you will agree with this, and that's okay. I mean, I don't want to get into argument. I'm very comfortable you having your thought on this. It's to me, when these things come out that are like spoon-fed ideology inside a comic book, the thing that bugs me is less the left-leaning aspect of it or right-leaning. I mean, but let's face it is rarely right-leaning. But independence, like some of the crowdfunded books that are quote-unquote right-leaning comics, they're just as insufferable to me because the ideas are presented like I'm a moron. It's like it's a, bad Saturday morning cartoon. Do you remember when you were a kid? Maybe, you made this was an older person thing. You used to wake up early in the morning to watch cartoons on Saturday. And it was always kind of cruel because you had to get up early for school. And then now they're wanting you to get up early on Saturday, which is a bunch of bullshit. That's sleep in day. But you would get up early. You'd have to because the good cartoons are on at like 6 in the morning. By the time you got to like 10:30 in the morning, the cartoons were ass by that point. That's where they would put on the ones that had dopey messages, and it's like, oh, gee whiz, Heathcliff, learns the dangers of drugs. And it's like, you hated those because it wasn't the message. It was the sappy moron way they would put it out. And that's how a lot of comics are like. I mean, I read the Exceptional X-Men, and that comic reads like a bad Saturday morning cartoon. It's like these characters are talking to each other like they're. I mean, it's just it has the mental challenge of the Hostess fruit pie ads from the 70s in the comics. They're just dumb, and it's like it's not the politics. It's dumb. You could replace the words to go the other direction. I mean, you got like pages of people going, I think Kitty dating a woman is natural and good. And you got to be yourself. My pronouns are she, they. You could replace the words with, make America great again. Tariffs, nice. I like shopping at Walmart, and trans people should not be in girl sports. I mean, you don't want to read that in a comic. Fuck. It's just bad. So that's the challenge. But anyway, this pushback I get that, hey, it's Spider-Man and we love Spider-Man. That's the character we grew up with, and we should be able to have a comic book like Spider-Man. Okay, so let's take your idea now to conclusion. If you have to have separate but equal time, or the fairness doctrine level of time in comics, let's say your favorite character is the Hulk. So does Marvel now have to publish two Hulk comics, like a Hulk comic where like he's a raging Democrat and another one where he's a Republican? Like, is in one comic, is he, fighting for, hell if I know, he's like protesting for Palestine and using pronouns, and in the next issue he's guarding the border. Like, God damn, that sounds pretty hilarious actually. But no, that's not a comic book anybody wants. That's the problem with it. I mean, I'll give you this. So I'll tweak your idea a little bit. And this is the show for trying to solve problems, right? The solution to what you want, and this would be what I'm about to say is impossible. Okay, I recognize that. I mean, we're living in fantasy land, but this would be the solution. If the problem that we're solving is you want to have equal numbers of Republican and Democrat comics, which God help us, why? But if that's the case, then this is what you would want to do. Push all the characters immediately into public domain. All of them. Make it so that Marvel is basically, and DC are basically giant licensors where if, anyone can publish a Batman comic, anyone. But you're giving 20% of your money to DC. Whatever you make, you have to pay them a royalty or a license or whatever else. And then DC basically says, we're out of the comic business. We're just going to collect checks, let other people do what they want to do. And you could have a comic company that's like, hey, we produce comics of Batman, where Batman is hunting down illegals for ice. And that's the comic. And maybe it sells well, maybe it doesn't. And in the other one, I don't know. Batman is protecting drag queen story hour. I don't know. But that's the comic. And then every, basically, whichever one set, DC gets to sit back and go, we have no skin in this game. We're just taking the 20%. And whoever wins, wins. And you basically do that. I mean, again, there's legal reasons. There's a million reasons why what I just said won't ever happen. And the reality is that there's no incentive in that for anyone. If you really want to tell a story about Batman deporting illegals, you wouldn't want to get. I mean, first of all, your target market is already a niche one. Nobody wants to buy that, or very few people will want to buy that. So you got a small market. Now you're saying, okay, with out of your profits, you have to give money to DC. I mean, that's not going to help. And it's a short term solution anyway, because, fast forward 10 years of people putting out books like that, and the brand would be so eroded that whatever shine you get from using Batman in a comic book would be gone. So it just practically doesn't make sense. Yeah. Anyway, look, the key here is this, and it really is this, and it probably it doesn't taste good, it doesn't sound good. It really is. Old Kelly Sue DeConnick was a person before her time, a master of knowledge. Don't buy it. Literally, that's the answer. Um, trying to create a kind of a equal segment of stuff, it just doesn't work. The companies have no incentive to do that. The books that would come out of that are largely terrible, because it shines a spotlight on exactly the wrong thing. This is one of the, I guess every now and then people live stream to argue with my points. It's fascinating, by the way. I'm going to say this to people who, the EFAP, or they basically, they argue with a recorded video. You're a bunch of pussies, all of you. Have the argument in person. Invite the person on your show to debate them. They may not go, but the idea of I'm going to debate somebody one sided using kind of existing clip, I'm then going to, put a bunch of thought to it so I can actually formulate my arguments and never have any kind of rebuttal. I could just, you're not debating. Yeah, that's the safest, most, you know, pansy way to debate. If you truly want to get in there and argue, then argue. Don't argue one sided. It's just anyway, bunch of pussies. I find it wild. Anyway, but I, nobody really wants this. I mean, look, when I said putting the spotlight on the wrong thing, the purpose of Spider-Man should be, with great power comes great responsibility, fighting villains that are way outside of his power class and somehow finding a way to win, being able to juggle a personal life and a superhero life, and sometimes failing at that, having compelling subplots where your supporting cast or villains or others are trying to kind of plot of how they're going to take this guy down, and the childhood fantasy of a superhero story where people are fighting against all odds for the greater good. That's the focus of Spider-Man. The second you try and make the focus like, I'm going to promote, gender awareness and ideology, like the second that becomes a purpose. I was talking to an editor at Marvel, and they were talking about kind of being part of a pitch, and the writer was on this call, and the writer's like, and a big part of this story is we're going to investigate this supporting character's queerness. And it's like the the editor was describing, like, all of us we're like we're rolling our eyes, and we were in I feel I'm trying to tell this story without without um, keeping some confidentiality. I'll say Teams. Everybody, I mean, like, we're in like, nobody uses Teams. So that's perfect. We're in Teams, and we were chatting with each other like, oh, here we go again. And these are the people at Marvel, the editors, who are tired of this. And you're like, the pitch isn't. If the pitch isn't, heroes fighting against all odds to try and save the world, and and one of them is going to betray them, and there's a traitor in the midst, and it's going to be, if the pitch is less that and more, um, hey, we're going to investigate what it means to be a Kamala Harris supporter in the superhero world, like, you're putting a focus on the wrong thing. And if your answer is, hey, the all we need to do is show an equal number of heroes supporting Trump, no, like that's still the wrong thing to focus on. Um, I truly believe it. And anyway, it's why this argument has been. I need to wrap this up, but I'll end with this. I think there are a handful of people who, back in 2016, whatever, were making videos on social media, everything, and they were arguing against this comics slide into ideology over genre, the genre being superhero books. And the creators, a lot of who were new to the field, they wanted to write books that parroted their political beliefs, or maybe they were lazy and they were just regurgitating stuff they saw in the news, or, within their little bubble, or whatever, people they knew at college said, or whatever. They were taking delight in just taking kind of established characters and just ruining them for characters. I think there was some aspect of that. Um, I think that the people complaining initially had a point. Their point was, hey, Spider-Man shouldn't be talking about, gender politics. Unfortunately, a lot of those people were also the people who were complaining were, it was 2016, were supporters of Trump and were wearing their politics on their sleeves. And so it gave the creators an opportunity to say, oh, these are just a bunch of, MAGA Republicans. They twisted the argument from, these should be superhero books to right-wing people want them to have right-wing ideals, which wasn't what a lot of the original people were asking for. They weren't asking for politics. They were asking for, the focus to stay on heroes. And I think, and unfortunately, I think a lot of those people got duped pretty badly because, the culture war was all consuming. And so it became right-wing versus left-wing. It became, Trump versus Hillary, or, and all that. And they let their own argument get co-opted against them. They allowed it to go from what was a pretty clean argument, heroes being heroes, to, to something very different. I'll stop there, and maybe that's another video for another time. But I think that was a big moment where, there was a group that had the logical argument, the moral high ground, but they allowed themselves to get sucked into a political argument instead, and that they lost the war in that time. I mean, or basically nobody won the war at that point. It just became just a slap fest. But all right, enough out of this. No, I don't think it's a good idea. Bless you for trying, and I hope thank you for trying to make comics better, and just how do we solve this? It's worthy to try and figure that out. Thanks for listening.